I want to share with you the power of the girdle vessel and its capacity to hold what is most precious, the most precious aspects of our being. The girdle vessel of Chinese medicine is perhaps one of the most powerful of all the vessels because it binds and links everything together. So in a way, you might say, how can the girdle vessel help me? It's good for pretty much everything, especially anything to do with the centre of your body, your pelvis. So you might wonder what's here. The pelvis, our pelvic bones, but it's more than just our pelvic bones, it's also our pelvic floor, and the top part is at our ribs. So it's really this whole big area which contains most of the vital organs of our body. So it regulates our whole digestive system. It regulates our reproductive organs, our palaces. It regulates our capacity to eliminate and also to give birth. If this precious being within our pelvis is our baby, then our baby is being held within our pelvis by our girdle vessel. So it's a very powerful vessel, in fact, for pregnancy. And indeed, that was how I originally discovered it, because nobody had taught me the girdle vessel when I initially trained in shiatsu. But when I was working with pregnancy, because you can imagine in pregnancy when you're holding a baby in your girdle vessel, especially at the end of pregnancy, you can feel that there is something that's not just at the front, because all of the other vessels and meridians, most of their pathway is vertical. And the girdle vessel is really the only one that is more horizontal, apart from its partner, the penetrating vessel, which I also discovered in pregnancy, which there's a big part of it in our chest, which is also running a bit more in the horizontal axis. And it's the yin partner of the girdle vessel, and that's more about opening our heart and our breasts and chest. And again, very important for women. I've got a couple of separate videos on the penetrating vessel if you want to find more about her. Vessel of bonding, but very linked with the girdle vessel. And also I discovered the penetrating vessel, again, working with pregnancy, when of course it's very active, and postnatally when if a mother is breastfeeding her baby. But coming back to the girdle vessel, yes, clearly in pregnancy, for a woman, it's working at its hardest in our lives because it's having to physically hold the weight of the baby. So especially towards the end of pregnancy, it might become a bit overstrained. So creating weakness in our abdominal muscles, creating weakness in our pelvic floor. And that's why postnatally it's very important to gather in the girdle vessel. It's kind of the Chinese equivalent of closing the bones, but it's more than just the bones. So we've got the girdle vessel here showing the bones because that's clear to see, but it's also all of the muscles in the pelvis, but it's also wrapping all the way around. So you can see from the diagram, it's also in the whole of the lower back and going down through our lumbar spine, including this very powerful point of the gate of life, which is the origin of our energy in our lumbar spine. And then it wraps through our pelvic floor. So in this whole area, as I've already said, you've got most of the key organs in our body, but also you've got very important core muscles, which really physically hold everything together as well. So our abdominal muscles, the deeper muscles of the psoas, all the muscles of the hips, because girdle vessel also connects through our legs, and in fact its main regulating point is in the feet, so off its pathway. But of course we know if we have weakness in our pelvis, then we have likely to have issues with our legs and our feet. So that's also another thing about the girdle vessel, because you might think, oh, it's actually quite a short pathway, but this pathway is probably the most powerful area of our body. But we also have to remember that the girdle vessel has an influence on our lower body, our legs and our feet, because it's also into our hips, so it's including parts of the bones of our legs as well, but it's much more than the bones. But also, if our abdomen is weak, then we're probably going to have weakness in our shoulders. And so our hips and our pelvis do also very much influence our shoulders, our chest, our breasts if we're women, our heart. So even though physically the pathway doesn't run through here, it does connect with our heart. It is one of the extraordinary vessels, and also its partner is the penetrating vessel, which is why I also talked about the penetrating vessel. So that's why you can say that it regulates everything in quite a tangible physical way. I mean, when we looked at the governing and conception vessel, they regulate through the central nervous system, but girdle vessel regulates by encompassing everything around us. So it also contains the governing and conception vessel. Therefore, you could say it regulates everything. But it's especially when we want to work with it on ourselves, when we want to connect with the girdle vessel, connect with this very precious aspect in the middle of your body. And why do I have the goddess within it? Partly because that represents the most precious aspect of it, of us, our capacity to connect with our essence of who we are, the seat of our soul. In fact, the Greeks talked about the sacrum, and I include the sacrum as part of the girdle vessel, as holding our soul. And also the precious aspect of our capacity to reproduce, to give birth to new life, perhaps in the form of a baby, but perhaps in the form of creative projects, creative ideas. Certainly it's very linked to our expression of our sexuality, either our sexuality, our sensual nature, our connection with ourselves, or our connection with another. That's also why I like the goddess idea in our pelvis. It is very much related to the expression of our sexual energy and our most intimate connection with another through our sexuality, through our pelvic floor, through our womb, for men through the prostate connection, but also through our sexual organs. Our clitoris and our penis are not so different. They're very similar structures. For women, our clitoris is very hidden. For men, the penis is more on the outside. But that's also quite a precious part of our being, our capacity to connect sexually. So I could talk for hours about all the things that the girdle vessel can connect with, but hopefully you can see it is pretty much everything. I mean, when it's out of balance, and it's weak and it's not holding and containing us, then we might allow too much in from the outer world that we don't need. So we might be too open sexually to people that aren't helpful. We might also just have a weakness in any of the organs within the area. So we might have sluggish digestion, we might have also difficulty eliminating. We might not be able to take in nourishment from the food that we eat, because it is very much related to our digestive system. In Chinese medicine, we talk about the middle burner and the lower burner. That's all these organs in this whole area. In terms of our physical posture, if this area is weak, our abdominal muscles or our pelvic floor, then we're likely to have issues in our lower back, even in our legs, our ankles. It influences all our muscles. We might have tightness in our shoulders because it's not able to give support. In fact, I have a separate video on is there a girdle vessel in the upper part of our body? Because it's not the physical pathway, but we can see it's going to give support to the upper part of our body. You could see this upper part as being more the yin and the yang linking vessels, but we could also see it as part of the girdle vessel. Like it very physically as well as energetically protects our whole girdle area, because it's more than just our pelvis. It's also said to exist in the spaces around us, and some images that have been given for it are really like a cocoon, and it protects and supports us all around our body, not just around its physical pathway, but around our legs and around our upper body. So if it's weak, it's not giving that level of protection that it needs. But another way that it can become out of balance is just getting too stuck, that we've not got enough, well, we don't eliminate enough. So elimination is an important part of it. So going back to birth, it's a very important vessel for enabling the process of birth, for allowing us to let go of the baby. That's the yang aspect of it. Can it release our baby, or the most precious aspect of our being in sexuality as well, or in creativity? And if it can't release, then you're going to have a lot of blocked, frustrated energy, not maybe perhaps being able to give birth, or just being very frustrated and stuck. I'll go into the points in a moment, but that's an aspect of being too held. But also this holding can then create issues of holding within our digestive organs too. So we could have constipation, holding too much in the womb for women could be holding all the blood in. So it's often used if you have issues like endometriosis, blood stagnation, too much blood, or blood not being held in the pelvis. So it could be blocked blood being a bigger energy for Chinese than just the physical blood. So block, that we're not able with menstruation, that's another time of releasing. If the girdle vessel isn't strong, then the blood can't release through menstruation. So it gets stuck, and then you can get all sorts of issues with blood getting stuck. Again, if it was too loose, you'd get too much releasing. So, too stuck. And so now if we see, too stuck could also be contraction, too much contraction in muscles like the psoas muscle or the piriformis muscle in the hips, which could cause problems in the lower back. So you can see it's a really fundamental vessel. What else do I need to say about it? I think if you understand its character, the ideogram for the girdle vessel, it will also give you some ideas about its nature. Because in the ideogram, again, you've got this aspect of preciousness. So the ideogram, it's actually a fairly straightforward one compared with some of the others. It's actually expressing its energy a bit like a belt. So I've got my shawl here to show you. Something quite broad, but a broad belt. In some people talk about it as the belt channel, but it's much broader than what we would consider to be a belt. This is why it's a bit like the closing the bones. It's holding everything in. But also I've bought this shawl because it's actually a belt, and you can see on the bottom part there's things hanging from it. So precious objects. So we could have other precious objects or bracelets or jewels. This was a common thing in China, and there'd be pockets and you'd have all your precious things held around you. So I really love that preciousness of the image of the girdle vessel like this. And within that also, it's got this idea of a flow and a continuity and linking things together. So it's helping this flow and continuity and link within its physical pathway, but it also contains within that the idea of things that are hanging down, things that connect to the earth. So it's actually this idea of guiding all of the energies in our body. So you can imagine a nice simple image I also have. If it's too contracted, But clearly the belt, it's very complex because often it's not all contracted or all released. It's like aspects of it are a bit slack. So the slack or the loose bits are often our abdominal muscles and our pelvic floor. That's all a bit floppy. And then it's contracted more in our hips and our piriformis, and we've got blockages here, or perhaps in our lower back. So it's a bit simplistic to say it's all too tight or all too loose, but to just give you some idea. But if overall it's tighter than looser, it's actually going to block the flow between our upper body and our lower body. So it's like we're kind of cut off. So we can't express our feelings that well because we're not really connected to our centre. We're cut off. And sometimes when you see people, and it's almost like they're two people, you feel, could be someone that's very much in their head and they're not connected to the centre and to their most precious aspect of their being, their sexuality, or they're just cut off from their more earthy feelings. We often think of that as the base chakra, the basic call, why are we here? And they're cut off from that. And they're maybe cut off from the earth. So it's very powerful for helping regulate this basic connection between, well, why are we here? Are we able to inhabit our whole body, or are we just in our head, or just on the earth? So that's if it's overall too tight. And if it's overall too lax, it's someone that's a bit like they've lost their compass. That's an image that I often like for it. It's not contained in the ideogram, but it's that sense of, are we able to guide ourselves? Are we able to have that appropriate balance between our connection to the earth, our connection to our centre, our sexuality, our connection to our heart and the heaven? And if it's flowing well, we have this sort of internal compass and we can guide ourselves, we can adapt, we can change, but it's coming from the centre. Sometimes people call it the North Star. It's a guide, it's our orientation in life. How do I know what I'm going to do? That's why it's that precious being. But if it's all a bit floppy and all over ourselves, then when it's too floppy, it's someone that's kind of lost their sense of direction. They're just a bit all over the place and moving around, and they don't know where to go, and their whole body is almost a bit floppy because there's nothing in the centre. They've lost their sense of direction. And so just to add in a couple more details, because the points I've added in my diagram, points that you won't find in the textbooks, because the most important points they are often given are liver 13 and gallbladder 27. 26 gallbladder is actually called the Dai Mai point, the Girdle Vessel point. And if you know a bit about Chinese medicine, liver and gallbladder are the energies of wood, the energies of spring. They're quite active. Obviously, they affect our liver and gallbladder. And so within that wood energy is that sense of direction, like the spring. We're surging out of the yin, the water, the winter, and we know where we're going, like a plant reaching to the sky. That's a nice image for the girdle vessel as well. But I've added in some extra points. I don't think they were included in the original charts because some of them are governing vessel points, Ming Men, governing vessel 4, so you'll see that on the back. And it makes sense to me that that's the gate of our life, and it's very linked to our kidney energy, which is our ancestral energy. And then each side of it, I've added in a bladder point, which also bladder points, which also relate to the kidneys. So there is that watery sense in it. It's really containing all the elements. It's got the wood of the gallbladder, the direction, but it's also got that the fluids, our sexual fluids and secretions, the waters of the womb, fluid in the body, elimination, you've got bladder, kidneys. So fluid, they're important energies also for the girdle vessel. And then as you go, that's why I've also included the bladder points on the sacrum. And I love this name of these 8 points on the sacrum. I'll reveal my most precious being for a moment. But these 8 points on the sacrum, there are 8. And someone once told me, and I can never find the reference for them, but the 8 immortal caves. And I love that image. It's like the Greek word of the sacrum, the sacred bone. It's linking all the energies of the extraordinary vessels together. And this is the intersection of bladder, water, and gallbladder, wood. And then as you come round, you've got the other points that I've added in. But I also added in the governing vessel and conception vessel points, because you can't have a girdle that's not linked up. Otherwise, you get this seeping out of energies or too much holding in of energies. So I think that that's what I want to share with you today. I do love the girdle vessel. It's, how do we say, which is one of the most powerful, but it is extremely powerful because all of the other vessels pass through it, all the other 7 vessels, and most of the 12 meridians also pass through it, apart from some that are only in our arms, like lung and heart. But I've already said it connects with the upper and the lower body. So I would like to end by coming back to feeling that precious nature, the godlike or goddess-like nature of you, even like the kundalini type of energy, that snake-like whirling energy of powerful, sacred creativity within your body. And place your hands here, feeling that most sacred part of you. And do the mudra. The 4th finger is the gallbladder mudra. And it's the same fingers as the yin and the yin and the yang linking vessels, because it's the same points. Holding, making like a figure of 8 in the centre, maybe connecting the little finger and the index fingers. Well, I've got this connection in my pelvis, which feels like it resonates round to my lower back. So perhaps just adding in your heart. And the affirmation is, I guide you. I am stable. I contain. I release. So thank you for sharing this brief journey into the wonderful gifts of the girdle vessel or the Dai Mai.